They come up with this idea, for instance, that there are indigenous people who were moved out. The Palestinians are indigenous people, and they were moved out by the Jews. You can do that if you want. Now let's do Britain. You want to play the indigenous people own the land first game, and the other people should fuck off? I do not want to live in a country with Hamas supporters. I want them deported. I want them chucked out. Simple. If there are people in the UK who are offended by the posters of missing Jewish children, they must leave.
Alrighty, guys. Welcome back to A Conservative Confucius here. Let's get into it. We're going to be covering Douglas Murray today, his interview with Trigonometry, over discussing some of the War on the West, his book, which he has written and released in the last year, I think. Well, it's been about a little over a year now. And it's a really good book. I encourage you guys all to read it. So he's going to be discussing that with the Trigonometry hosts and some of the things that got on October 7th, the radical Islam invading the West, and so on. All right, so let's get down to it. Don't forget to go down there, smash the like button, hit that subscribe button, ring the bell for notifications. It really helps this channel when you guys subscribe. It really, really helps. Around 60% of my viewers currently are not subscribed, so please go down there, subscribe. It really, really, really helps. And don't forget to share this video if you like it. I appreciate it. So let's get right into it. All righty.
Douglas, you're back for the, I don't know which time, but we've had you on many times. And I put it to you that there's good news and bad news. The good news is that you were right. The bad news is that you were right. What have you made of the last 3 weeks?
I suppose like all of us, it's a mixture of things. First shock, then horror, then shock again, then horror, then disappointment, and then rage, probably, in roughly that order. Horror at what happened in Israel, shock like everyone, this was able to happen. Horror at the details of what happened, shock then at the response on the streets of cities like the one we're sitting in London. The fact that there were so many people who didn't even give it a day before they turned out on the streets of my city, supporting the people who'd done this act of terror. And then in the weeks since, increasing rage. Yeah. Rage that I have to share a country with these people.
So I'm going to stop this just for a sec. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, it's similar feelings that I had after the attack. It really kind of woke me up, honestly. I didn't really think things were this bad. I didn't think the hatred against Jews was so widespread. I knew there was its weird little outlets on the internet, and there were groups here and there. I knew the left had some kind of hatred for the Jews. I knew that the kind of closed off, closeted right, that they had some shit too, but it was never really out in the open. It was never public. It wasn't as bad as, it used to be. That's what I thought. And I was completely proved wrong. It was the exact opposite. It's far worse than it ever was. It's just, back then, we were more like, we jumped on different types of violence. Today we have like burning down cities. Back then it was just killing people, burning down neighborhoods instead of, going and killing the Jews in that neighborhood. And if it continues to escalate, we're going to get back to that point. But I see the hatred on a far greater level. Oh, by the way, I might be taking a hit off of vape a couple times. I quit smoking. So this is, supposed to help with my lungs. Like I told you in the past, I got some issues. We're fighting. I got surgery on them in about 6 months, just a minor surgery to remove the cancerous adenoma. So trying to get off the cigarettes 100%. If you guys see me puffing, I hope, I'm not, I don't endorse smoking or vaping. This is me getting rid of a problem I've had for years. I started when I was just 12 years old smoking. So, just letting you guys know. Alrighty, let's get back into it.
And I think the thing that we've all had to come to terms with is how some people have just been so open about supporting an extremist, Islamist, terrorist group, and also refusing to acknowledge it as such.
Well, before you answer, Douglas, one of the things that I've noticed in comments is people like, well, these are pro-Palestine marches. And I think we have to be clear that what we're talking about is in the first 2 days, prior to Israel responding in any way, there were people celebrating.
Yep. Yeah. Out on the streets parading and acting like this was something that should be lauded as a great achievement by the oppressed Palestinians fighting back against their oppressors. It's the biggest load of horse crap in the world. I mean, it's so stupid. Oh, by the way, if you're wondering what my shirt says, guys, it says, "I'm the infidel that Allah warned you about." So I'm the infidel that Allah warned you about. Thought it was hilarious. I saw it online and I was like, yeah, that's mine.
But the bodies of the dead hadn't even been found. They were still warm in some cases. Some people were still in the process of being massacred. And even as that was still going on, people were already out in the streets of cities like London protesting against Israel. And that was what it was. It was straight away a protest against Israel. And, you know, look, there are lots of fine delineations you can do about it, some of which are true and some are not. You could claim that the people who've come out in recent weekends on the Saturdays care about Palestinian lives. I don't think they do. I just don't think they do. And I'll tell you one reason why, is that nobody in the Middle East, apart from the Israelis, cares about the Palestinians a jot.
No, nobody does.
I've traveled around the region.
Israel does, but no one else does.
Leaders of other countries in the region to know. The Jordanians do not like the Palestinians at all. They find them an unbelievable...
Jordan is Palestine, basically. Half of the... let's look at it this way. Most of the people in the West Bank who are over the age of, let's say, 75, they were born in Jordan. Most of the people... Actually, no, even more than that. It's younger than that, so it'd be like 70-ish, because of, wars, conflicts, territory lost, gain, and so on. So... and then the people who live in Gaza, most of them are either, yes, again, from Jordan, or they're Egyptian, because Gaza was under Egypt control, basically from, I don't know, one of the empires lost control of Gaza in the many years that Israel was under different people's control. It was then taken by Egypt, and then it was not given back to, it was taken by Israel in the 6-Day War, and then instead of giving it back to Israel, we took all of the Sinai Peninsula and then in Gaza as well. And we were like, you know what? Have all that back, but we deserve Gaza because technically it was our land to begin with. But then the Philistines colonized it. We took it back after we defeated that enemy. And then in the coming years since, empires took it and traded it, and eventually it ended up in your hands. And they were fine with that. They didn't want the people who lived there, and they didn't want the Jews who were there either. The Jews or the Arabs who would later call themselves Palestinians. They didn't want either of them. So we took it, and then that became an issue. It became the biggest issue of our state for a long time. And I don't think people understand how much these people in this land they don't really have any true connection to the land. It's truly insane.
Encumbrance, and that's why they haven't opened their borders to the people in the West Bank who should effectively be in Jordan. The Egyptians loathe the Palestinians. The authorities are keeping the border between Egypt and Gaza closed because they hate the Palestinians. I know people who were born in Gaza when Gaza was owned by Egypt. If Egypt wanted to solve the Gaza problem, it could do so tomorrow by taking control of Gaza or allowing the people of Gaza to go into Egypt, where they should be. Nobody else in the region cares. The Qataris host Hamas and fund Hamas, as well as, of course, pumping billions of pounds into countries like this one to make us deeply compromised. But nobody in the region cares about the Palestinians. Certainly nobody cares about them more than the Israelis, who go to incredible efforts to try to limit the deaths and the mistreatment of the Palestinians, even as the whole region, the world, has given them these people to look after. Nobody really cares about the Palestinians, and frankly, the idea that Muslims care about their brother Muslims is absolute rubbish. I think we've flattered much of the so-called Muslim street by even pretending this in recent years. Hundreds of thousands of Muslims have been killed in Yemen in the last few years, and there hasn't been a protest 1%.
400,000 in Yemen, 500,000 in Syria. These aren't brother Muslims in Africa, but in Congo and in Darfur, both of them together, about 1.5 million non-Muslims have been killed by radical Muslims. In Sudan, Muslims were killed by other Muslims, and Muslims killed non-Muslims as well. It's around 375,000 there. Around 150,000 in Somalia. And then what else? I mean, yeah, I think that's it. So 500,000 Syria, 400,000 Yemen, and so on.
Of the size of what we've seen in recent
No protests,
days and
though.
weeks in the West. Hundreds of thousands of Muslims have been killed in Syria in the last over a decade, since the civil war in Syria, by Assad, by the Assad regime, by rival jihadist groups, by intra-religious sects, and much more. And we haven't seen 1% of the people who turned out on the streets this day. The idea that Muslims actually care about their fellow Muslims is insane. They don't. What they care about is Jews. There is something at the very root of Islam and followers of the Muslim religion who cannot bear any war in which Israel is fighting, and most of all loathes any war in which Israel is winning. And you can see it. It's at the absolute core of their being. This is why they are on the streets of this city and others marching. It's not because they love fellow Muslims, it's because they hate Jews.
Yep.
What? So you're saying there's something at the root of the religion. Well, let's tease that apart. What do you mean by that?
Well, there's two particular things worth mentioning. One is, of course, that Muhammad, the founder of Islam, himself beheaded, massacred many, many Jews. Famously.
Yeah, I mean, you have Khaybar, which he doesn't actually, I don't think he's probably going to mention. I've never heard him mention a lot of like many historical events, so I doubt he will. But yeah, so you have Khaybar, where he beheaded a whole bunch of Jews, some Christians, very few though, killed a whole bunch of other ones, enslaved a bunch, sex slave, or actual slavery for a lot of the women, and then went back to Medina later, killed, ended, I don't even think I can say that K word now, either on YouTube. Censorship's getting crazy. So he ended a lot of Jews there in Medina later. And then, of course, there was just raids and wars and all kinds of stuff where he killed many, or ended many. YouTube, not going to like me talking about this stuff.
One battle in particular, and the Banu Quraysh. It's a story you can find in the Quran and the Hadith, and of course this is because the Jews would not accept the revelation of Muhammad, such as it was, and so they were seen within Islamic tradition as being one of the first people who turned down the opportunity to join Islam.
Yep, Medina,
and as a result, of course, Muhammad decapitated hundreds and hundreds of Jews. So that's not a good start. But there's a bigger thing, I think, within the Muslim world, which is worth mentioning, which the late Bernard Lewis pointed out on a number of occasions, which is the great problem within Islam when it comes to not just Judaism, but the wider non-Islamic world, is that the Muslim religion claims to be the last revelation from God to man, which we all know is a very large claim to make. It says there have been previous revelations, but this is the last and final one. And what's more, God has given you a book.
Well, technically, Christianity says that, and even though Jews don't claim that, they want to cite, and I'm a Jewish person, so I mean, I'm a Messianic Jew. I'm a Jew by birth, but not by religion. I practice the Jewish holidays, like we've talked about many times, but I don't do Kapparot, which is a prayer on Yom Kippur to release my sins, pray them into an item, whether it's bread that you give to fish or into a chicken, which you then, butcher. But I don't do that. So, because I know that Yeshua died for my sins, so that's a different thing. But people don't. It's not that Muhammad claims that he's the last revelation. This is the last set of revelations from God. That's not why Islam is a problem. I think he wants to believe that, and I'm sure he knows a lot about Christianity and Judaism, but I don't think he knows as much as he thinks he does. I love Douglas Murray. He's amazing. He does so much great work. He's a pivotal person in this, current going, the things that are going on currently. He is a person that is needed on the front lines. I agree with that 100%. We stand by the person. I stand by him and his works. But the reason why Islam is a problem is not because it claims to be the last revelation, but it claims to be, if you don't believe this revelation, then you will die. we will, either end you, we will, stone you, we'll do whatever if you don't agree with us, then we'll do all these bad things to you. Whereas Christianity says, we don't want to force you into anything. We don't give you these options to say either join or die. Yes, there have been many people in history who have abused and twisted and distorted the Christian, or, in that case, Catholic religion, which I don't really like Catholicism. I mean, I think that there are a lot of great things about Catholicism, but I don't agree with the Catholic institution. That's where I have my issues. The Vatican, Pope, basically any kind of papal thing, popes and popery is in general. But yeah, so that's the issue with Islam, is that it says, do this or else. Do this or we will do that. And whereas Judaism says, do what you want or believe it. Either way, it's no skin off my butt, and Christians are supposed to do the same thing, where they say, okay, well, you can live in sin and go to hell, or you can live with God and abide by his rules and serve him and go to heaven. And those are the two options. It's basically the same thing. Like, if you don't, whatever, no skin off my butt. But if you do, good for you. That's the same thing. And then you have Muslims who say, either believe what we say and then you'll go to paradise, or if you don't, we'll still kill you and you'll go to hell. It's like, what? I'm sorry. So you're going to send me to somewhere where I was supposedly already going to go? You can't just allow me to, do my thing. And they believe that if they allow you to, be, whether it's another religion, Hindu, Christian, Jew, whatever, or they allow you to just be atheist, what they think is that you're going to corrupt the Muslims, that they're then going to convert. So they say, we're here to convert more and more and more of the world and take it over. That's their goal. It's the stated goal of Islam, is to have Islam be the controlling, not only government, but religion, or not only religion, but government around the world. They believe that Islam should cover over the entire face of the earth. That's literally in the Hadith and the Quran. So when you say these things, obviously there's no compatibility or compatibility with other religions, with people who have no religion, and that's the issue. It's not that they claim to be the last revelation.
Quran. And the Quran is the one book you need. The opening, here is the book wherein is no doubt, which is quite a bold claim as well, I'd say. But the claim at the foundation of Islam is, here is the book wherein is no doubt, and it's the only book you need. And it's the final word from God that man will ever have. Now, if you are the recipients of this book, the people who end up either converting or being forced to convert to Islam, and eventually the areas that Islam takes Europe largely past the Muslim world by, this shouldn't be exaggerated, certain parts of the Muslim world, of course, give the rest of the world, didn't improve the economic conditions of its people, establish of course, many Jews are already living in the area that's now Israel, but already lived there, but many others come from other parts of the world, including from the Middle Eastern countries where they're chucked out by the governments in 48 and so on. The Muslim world sees this tiny, tiny bit of land. This tiny bit of land, which, among other things, is the only bit of the Middle East that doesn't have any oil. And they make of it a much more successful country than any of the countries around. Now, if you create a Palestinian state, you just have another failed Arab state, another failed Muslim state to add to the more than 50 already failed. Just another Lebanon. What is the explanation that the Jews who refused the Prophet's invitation to Islam are still here, have this tiny bit of land, and make all of these discoveries and other things that show...
Sorry if I'm making weird faces, my leg is asleep.
...themselves to be so successful? It's just some kind of stab in the heart. And instead of saying, we're doing this wrong, the thing is, the Jews are doing something right, and that must mean that they've rigged the game.
Yep, exactly.
That's why they can, among other things. And it leads to the deep pathology of anti-Semitism, which has been largely eradicated in Europe among Europeans, not entirely, but largely. There are still some bits of the far right you can find across Europe and occasionally in the UK.
I would say that it's not the far right that's the supreme anti-Semitic threat. And even he seems to recognize this most of the time, but it's the far left. It's the far right has their weird views, and I wouldn't even call them right wing. It's like they're more like just this odd fringe group that says occasionally that they're far right or says they're right wing, but they're really not, because if you evaluate their values, they're nothing like anyone on the right. So it's like they're basically this politically homeless group that kind of fringes on the outskirts of politics. And then you have the left, the far left and the left, who hold similar views, but view them in different ways. They believe essentially the same things about Jews and power and money and all this crap. And then they just view them through different lenses. They're like, oh yes, I believe that Jews are this way or that this is that way because of this framework or this setup. And then they believe it in a different setup, in a different framework. And that's really the only difference between the two. And right now we're seeing that it's not the right-wing crazies or the right-wing, the fringe lunatics who post really disgusting things on Twitter. It's not them who are going into the streets and attacking Jewish people. It's the left-wing crazies, the left-wing lunatics at the pro-Hamas marches, that they are doing it. So it's always been that that weird fringe group. They don't really participate in violence until the violence has already begun. Once they realize the violence is okay, or at least not okay, but it's being allowed by whatever society it's in, then they'll go in and they'll take part in that violence. But before that, it's almost always the left that tees up that violence and gets it to the point where then other nasty, worse people join in.
With a sort of the whiff of this noxious thing still emerges. On the left, of course, it's much closer to the boat. But principally anti-Semitism in our own day, of the kind that we hoped had ended with Hitler, exists and indeed thrives in the Muslim world. And the Muslim world is now in our world in Europe, and so we have the Hitlerian horrors of anti-Semitism back.
Well, I have no doubt you're right, Douglas, but one of the things that I think all of us have been struck by in recent weeks is that the pro-Palestine cause, let's put it in that language as they do, is very popular among young people. In fact, I'm sure you've seen the polls which show that young people believe the Hamas attack was genocidal and believe it was justified on the basis of what Israel
They are
required.
pro-genocide.
It seems to be. And not all of those people are young Muslims in this country. Some of them
most aren't.
not. How did that happen?
Fantastic ignorance. I mean, does anyone around this table, or anyone watching, honestly think that we have a generation that is well educated?
No.
Touche.
I mean, find me the teacher or find me the professor at any university that in the last 50 years who would say to you, every year the undergraduates come up, the students come up, and they just know more and more each year.
What did I show you the other day? The video I did about the girl with the gender studies degree, where literally all she was learning was activist books. One was about slavery, one was about supposedly white colonialism in the modern centuries, and then another one was about Palestine. A girl learning about gender, who should learn about whatever the hell they learn about in gender crap, and then along with maybe reproductive biology to have at least some kind of scientific basis behind whatever else conspiratorial bullshit they believe in. They should at least have some type of scientific basis. But instead of learning anything like that, or even anything to do with gender at all, they only learned about Palestine, race, white colonialism, and what was the last thing? The AIDS epidemic in the 80s. Like, what does that have to do with gender studies? Are you insane? Like, that's what these kids are they're not being taught anything. They're being indoctrinated on a level that has never been seen before. Not even Mao's Cultural Revolution, where students would report on their parents and teachers. We've never seen anything like this. I mean, if the government said to report teachers who teach certain things, students right now would do that in a heartbeat. You would see 90% of the students in liberal colleges do it. It's insane.
Maybe in certain sciences you could say in a particular field. You couldn't say it about the humanities at all. You couldn't say it in most fields. Certainly people don't come up every year knowing more and more history. The reason why the young people you talked about believe this is because they have been fed a form of indoctrination, a particular version of history, which effectively, as you both know, maps on a very specific and perverted version of American racial history and maps it onto absolutely everything in the rest of the world. Add to that a particular form of anti-colonial history, post-colonial history, whatever you want to call it, which knows nothing of colonialism, but knows only about the post-colonial world. And you also see that that is mapped onto the Middle East. So these people who talk about Israel and probably couldn't point to it on a map, they certainly don't know which river they mean when they chant from the river to the sea. They couldn't find that on a map, that's for sure.
From the river to the sea, of course I've chanted it. Do I think that all Israelis should be pushed out of the country, or Jews or should be treated like this? No.
Do you know which river and sea they're talking about, by the way?
I don't know the name.
The river, I know the Mediterranean, it would be the sea, but no, I wouldn't know the river, no.
Okay, that's
it, yeah.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
These people talk in what terms? They basically fall into two groups. They talk in terms of occupation, colonizers, apartheid. And this is the Americanized racial justice version of this mapped onto the Middle East. That the Israelis are colonizers, for instance, and that they're indigenous peoples, and the Palestinians are indigenous peoples, despite there being Jews in the land many years before anyone even came up with the term Palestinian, which is a disputed term anyway. So they come up with this idea, for instance, that they're indigenous people who were moved out. The Palestinians are indigenous people, and they were moved out by the Jews, the Israelis, the Zionists. And this version is, of course, a replay of that version of American history, which is there with the Edenic first populations of America, the indigenous peoples, and then people from Europe came, the wicked Spanish and Italians and Portuguese and the French and even the British come and do their thing. And so they just put this version of history onto the Middle East. To those people, I would say, fine, you can do that if you want. Now let's do Britain. Want to play that game? You sure? You better not get the British started. But that's
Tell me
one
more,
version.
Douglas. What do you mean?
You want to play the indigenous people own the land first game and the other people should fuck off? Well, it's 60 years of mass migration into the UK. Who are the indigenous peoples of the UK?
Scotland
People who've been
and
here the
Irish.
longest. Who are the settlers? Who are the illegal settlers in Britain?
Technically, you could say I almost said the Andals. When I'm like freaking watching Game of Thrones. Oh my god. I meant to say the Saxons and the other freaking Saxon whatever group of people that came from Germanic area and like we're kind of northern France and stuff. They moved into Europe after the Romans left, and they took their place basically, and that led to basically the start of what you would call England, and not just Romanized whatever they had taken over England and Wales. And then you had the Scots, and other Celtic groups and Gaelic groups, and then you had the Irish. And that was it. Those Celtic and Gaelic groups, the Irish, Celts, Scots, and things like that, they were the original inhabitants of the, place of England. But if you want to talk about for a long, long time now, I mean, the Saxons have been in England since frickin' basically like the third or fourth century. So they've been there forever.
Oh, well, that would be the people who've arrived. Does anyone want to go there?
Well, you see, Douglas, I think what you're saying is logically sound, as you know. But I was very struck by something. We haven't released this episode yet, but we had a conversation with Michael Malice when we were in America. And he said to me, Konstantin, you've got to realize at some point that these people do not use language to communicate. They use language to manipulate.
Sure.
And so what you are saying makes sense, except they would say, well, no, what do you mean? You are straight, white, or not straight, white, or whatever you are, right?
I'm a blue-haired lesbian, non-binary black woman.
That's not how they see you, Douglas.
Well, I self-identify.
Yes. And the oppressed people are the people with more melanin in their skin.
Well, they should speak to the Yemeni Jews. They should speak to the Ethiopian Jews. They wouldn't even know what I was talking about.
they
They can look. They can look it up. They can educate themselves.
The point I'm trying to make to you is, we have a narrative in this country, certainly the native population, or certainly the longest living here native population, they are the oppressors. And you know that all of this is about this oppress-oppressed dynamic. So your argument in their world doesn't work.
Well, the girls in Rotherham and everywhere else in Britain who were raped by the thousands by Pakistani rape gangs in the last 20 years were not the oppressors, were they? I would say that they were the oppressed.
Definitely.
But let me return to the second class of person who is of the left, of the kind that I was mentioning, who the second class of critic of Israel. And we learn a lot from this. What are the other accusations that they put, apart from the Americanized social justice versions? What are the other versions of this that they put on it? They say the Israelis are committing genocide, that the Israelis are like the Nazis, that the Israelis were as bad as Hitler. Now, what is this? First of all,
Disingenuous.
we have to hit on the head the idea that the Israelis are committing genocide, which is rife out there. It would be the only genocide in history in which the population massively expanded during said alleged genocide. The population of Gaza has shot up in the last 18 years since Israel.
1,500%.
So you could say that they are extremely unsuccessful genocidists, or people who would like to commit genocide but haven't managed to for some reason. But none of the analysis of what is actually happening, and I and anyone else who has traveled through the region widely can tell you this, it is nothing like, for instance, what Bashar al-Assad has done to the Syrian people over the last 13 years. It's nothing like what has been happening in Yemen in the last decade. It is not anything approaching a genocide that is happening in the West Bank or Gaza. So why do they say it? Second, why do they say like Hitler? Third, why do they say like the Nazis? These young people have been brought up with only one bit of knowledge from history, which is Nazis. And if you only know about one thing from history, it's likely that you will decide that...
It's not that they only know one thing from history, it's that they only know one word or bad guy from history. They don't really believe the other bad guys are real bad guys because we didn't have full-on wars with them. And since technically we had 2 wars with Germany, not one, they view Germany as not just Nazis in the Second War, but in the First War, even though Germany was almost like completely scapegoated in that war. I mean, it was unbelievable. Yeah, they ended up getting really bad with the Ottoman Empire, which, I mean, basically they had no choice. But they were screwed. I mean, and they ended up getting they had to pay reparations to different countries and all kinds of stuff. It tanked their economy, which is what led to Hitler. And we look at history and we say, okay, what are the bad guys? And like people like me who literally study history, that's my thing. That's what I'm most proficient in. Look and say, okay, I can see the worst bad guy in history is in the last 100 years isn't Hitler, even though he killed my family. I'm not going to say that because I'm not ignorant. It's Mao Zedong, 100,000 dead. And then it's Joseph Stalin with 60,000 dead. And then you could say Hitler with roughly, if you count the war deaths, if you count the deaths in the Holocaust, specifically just the camps, 6.7 million. Jews who died outside of the camps, another 4 million. And all of the deaths in the war, you're looking at around 25 million. So it's quite a bit. You're looking at like roughly 50 million, 45 million. And then after that, you have people like Pol Pot and Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-un and Kim, whatever the middle one in between the two was, and all the different, Vietnamese ones and all the different communists and totalitarian dictators and all of that, you know, whether it's Castro or whatever the dude's name is in Venezuela and all of them. It doesn't really matter how you look at history if you don't actually know the history. If you're going to say, oh, the Nazis are the worst, well, what's your metric for that? What's your metric for worst? The worst ideology? Probably. But Mao Zedong's was pretty bad too. Kill your parents because you love the government? That's pretty freaking evil, dude. I'd say that's probably just as evil as hating the Jews. I mean, it's maybe even more evil. Hate your parents if they don't agree with us. Hate everyone around you. Snitch on everything that goes against our rules, and we'll not only give you money for it, or we'll give you favor for it, really, but we'll also get rid of the people who said those things, and then our society will be grander for it. Are you kidding me? And that's the issue with these kids. They don't know any of that. They don't know about Mao Zedong's Red Guard and what they really did. They don't know about the gulags and the prison encampments, the labor camps and stuff in Siberia or in anywhere else in Russia. They don't know about the torture that all of these people went through during these places. They don't know about anything. They don't know about the fact that, you know, China literally like slaughtered thousands of people and tortured them in the most nefarious ways over generations, and no one hears about it. Why? Because it doesn't fit the narrative of what the academia views as villain, because it's on the left. And technically so is Nazism. It's National Socialism. But they don't want that. They've basically regulated Nazism to the right, so it becomes the forefront villain in every college kid's mind, which then distorts their entire view on the world because they don't actually know what the Nazis really did. And then you have idiots like Nick Fuentes, who thinks that for some reason it was exactly 6 million that were killed in the Holocaust. Exactly. Not 6.7, not 6.61, not anything. But for some reason they think exactly 6 million. Are you retarded? And they were like, oh, if you say it's 5,999,999, then you're viewed as a denier. And it's like, what? Do you really think that was exactly like that's the real number? Like, you've never heard of like rounding or just like, I don't understand these people, man. But yeah. All right, so let's go a little bit further. We're going to go to the next little point, and then we'll be done with this. Maybe finish it another time.
The whole of history and the whole of the current day can fall into two groups of people and be analyzed by the lens of this one thing. Hitler, not Hitler. Unfortunately, these young people are throwing out the only nasty accusation they know, and they are picking it up from people who are handing them the nastiest thing that they could say. Why do I say that? They are picking up from mainly Muslim pro-Palestinian voices and pro-Hamas voices.
By the way, those Muslims love Hitler. Literally in Palestine specifically and in Egypt, they literally read Mein Kampf to children. It's given, every household has a copy of Mein Kampf. And in Palestine, not only did almost every household have a copy of it, which IDF soldiers have proven, but they literally had photos. Like, almost like Mexicans will have a photo of like, of Mary or another saint or something, and they literally had a photo that looked like it was a photo. It was the same style of like cheap paper photo with like a weird like fancy and like majestic background, and that was a picture of Hitler. And they kept finding those in house after house. That means that someone is selling those in mass in Gaza, and they were finding them over and over and over again. So these people love Hitler. So no matter it's like you're calling your enemy the people that you aspire to. Like, that doesn't make any sense. And the reason they're doing it is because they know in the West, saying Hitler or Nazi is a way to use as a cudgel against whoever they're fighting against. But in their society, they view being called a Nazi as a great thing because that's what they are. They love that kind of ideology. They teach it to their children in schools. And I've already proven that over and over again.
These allegations, which come from the Muslim world against the Jewish state, because the Muslim world knows how much it will wound the Jews. That's why they say that. They say the Jews are just like the Nazis. because they know how much that would hurt any Jew. Now, these young people who pick up these arguments, knowingly or otherwise, are repeating this slur on the Jewish people. And some of them will know how much that hurts the Jews and will not mind. Some of them may not know how much that hurts the Jewish people. Why do these so-called pro-Palestinian peoples keep saying that it's just like the Warsaw Ghetto in Gaza? Why choose the Warsaw Ghetto? Why not choose something not involving Jews? Why not choose anything else from the history of the world?
It's not even close to the Warsaw Ghetto. I'm sorry, I don't think the Warsaw Ghetto had beach town resorts and 5-star restaurants with multiple Michelin stars. I don't think they had luxury car dealerships or anything close to that. They were scavenging food. They weren't allowed to have any form of money. They weren't allowed to own their own businesses anymore. Everything that if they ever sold anything for profit, all of the money went back to the Nazi party. Like, this is nothing like that. And I'm so tired of that excuse and that, or whatever you want to call it, that claim. It is absurd on every level, and it is beyond offensive. Come on.
First of all, by the way, it's not a very good comparison, is it? Because when people managed to escape briefly from the Warsaw Ghetto, their first thing was not to run out and behead the first child they could find.
Duh.
But
It was to get to safety.
Why do they choose the Warsaw Ghetto? Because they wanted to hurt Jews. They want to hurt them as deeply as they can.
Yep.
Here's the other thing. If you have this great mistake of thinking that the whole world can be divided into Hitler and not Hitler, these kids, and kids they
Yep.
are going to discover, if they have their way, that they were Hitler.
Yep.
Why do I say that? Because if their chant came true, and from the River Jordan to the Mediterranean Sea, Palestine, which is to say a state which is Judenrein, because Mahmoud Abbas, the head of the Palestinian Authority, as well as Hamas, who of course have been running, if you can call it that, the Gaza for the last 13 years, since they killed the Palestinian Authority representatives in Gaza. Both Mahmoud Abbas, the head of the allegedly moderate PA, and Hamas both agree that Palestine must be Jew-free. There is no scenario in the heads of the Palestinian Authority or of Hamas in which one Jew is allowed to live in the Palestinian state. So if from the river to the sea a Palestinian state is created, it will mean either the eradication of all Jews in Israel or the displacement of all Jews in Israel, which means carting out every Jew from their historic homeland and either killing them or sending them somewhere else. And that would be done in the name of being anti-Nazi. These people have a huge problem coming their way if they get their way. They're ignorant as hell, and they will have to hope to God that they never get what they say they want.
Alrighty, so I think that's going to be it for today, guys. We'll finish enough of this later. It seems like this is, where the rest is calling for proportionality, looking at the issue through a Western lens, murder of some English people by terrorists, and so on. Alrighty, so let's get down. Let's, smash the like button, please, if you liked the video. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell for notifications. Like I said, it really helps us. It really helps the channel grow. And I think around 60% of you guys are still unsubscribed, so it really helps us. Don't forget to go down there and do all that, and then share this video if you liked it. And we'll catch you next time, guys. Alrighty, I appreciate you guys coming down, and we'll see you next time.